For many arts and cultural organizations, the pandemic has been a great disruptor. Much of the lost ground has recently been regained, but there's also recognition of a need for permanent changes, especially ways to engage the public through new technology. One of the main sources of help for that is the Digital Accelerator Program supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies, which is overseen by our guest, who previously served as the Cultural Affairs Commissioner for New York City, to tell us about how the program's contributing in Boston and especially at the Gardner Museum is Kate Levin. Thank you very much for being with us, Kate.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Hey, speak to the strategy here, and I know this is maybe reflected in your experience as the Arts Commissioner in New York City previously, but what are you trying to do with this kind of financial support?
One of the things that we have observed over the years is the infrastructure of cultural organizations, the business infrastructure, can sometimes lag behind the vision and the quality of the services being provided. And I think the pandemic taught us all that, in particular, the technology infrastructure of organizations made a huge difference in how places were able to continue delivering services after venues closed. So the strategy here is to try and help organizations be the best possible clients they can be around making good decisions and installing the optimal kinds of technology solutions to continue delivering on their missions. It's not to say that technology is the silver bullet or the answer to everything, but it's such a key part of how culture functions and reaches audiences. Whatever we can do to make that better for the sector and obviously for individual organizations, we think is an important contribution right now.
I know that at some venues you have to be there to get the benefit of what's going on or what's visible, but at the same time, with museums, especially art museums, what's the equation like these days? I mean, are there other ways of engaging people, especially for bringing in the revenue?
I think for cultural organizations, that's been the silver lining of all of this, is realizing how much they do have to offer that doesn't just take place in a venue. So, one of the reasons we were interested in supporting the Gardner Museum is that they've done a terrific series of music programs online throughout the pandemic. And, they've been able to reach a much larger footprint than in the past. So being able to spur on and support organizations that are acting on their creative mission and using technology to reach out, we think just will make such a difference to not only those audiences, but to the communities and the cities that those institutions help anchor.
What about some of the assets that could be capitalized on in the museum? Because here in Boston, it has this mystique, it's a place you have to be inside of to experience, but at the same time, they have a collection where, there are some things that are actually pretty hard to make out when you're inside the museum. Couldn't you do more digitally with some of those things?
That's exactly right. And there's so much interpretation that may not happen when you're standing in front of something. Ideally you're experiencing that, but you may get curious. You may want to find out more about it later. I mean, the Titian show that's currently at the museum it's an extraordinary series of paintings, but it's really the context and the thinking about the subject matter of those paintings in the intervening years that I think, makes that so special. The Apollo's Muse show that the museum did recently, in a way, that was all about the context of the work and how you deliver that information so that people's curiosity is both piqued and rewarded. And, ideally that helps make everybody sort of think differently, have a sense of license around inquiring in all different kinds of aspects of life moving forward. That's, one model of the way that a cultural organization can serve well beyond its physical structure.
Yeah, and right now, I've been in the museum. I've seen the one Titian that's in their permanent collection. One of the things that's hard to pick up on when you're in the building is that there's a personal story there. Isabella Stewart Gardner, the acquisition of that painting, what that meant to her almost psychologically. What about the inability to really capture much of that inside the building and the need to get to it some other way?
I think that's part of what the value of culture really is that it's, if you will, kind of an aggregate experience. You can see something, you can hear something, and the way it unfolds in your head over time is how an experience really anchors and takes root. In the case of culture, ideally, those experiences are all generative, and they continue to add to a sense of identity and potential in the world. So that's exactly the kind of assist that digital is particularly good at. One of the other organizations we're working with in Boston now is the ICA. We've helped develop an app called Bloomberg Connects that offers people free exposure to a whole range of cultural institutions all over the world. And ICA is one of our new partners. And so, if you're not in Boston, if you can't get to Boston, if you've been to the museum but you're curious about something, you have a whole different way of accessing not only the incredible art, but the incredible thought and care that curators and the people who have built the building and all the forces that go into making these kind of assets want to share with you.
Well, in addition to collections, museums have programming. At the Gardner, they have artist in residence programs, and there's outreach into the community. How can digital enhancements do more with that?
I think the possibilities are endless. I think the key is how cultural institutions are understanding what their audiences want. I would say that's the one downside of digital, is that it can also, it can do a lot of things that aren't very people friendly. And so occasionally you'll get sort of digital assets that are overbuilt, and people have a hard time figuring it out. I don't know about you, Chris, but there are days when, making my way through my computer software to write an email gets a little funky. So, but it's kind of like anything else. Museums understanding what's the best setup for the lobby, and how do you signal to people where the bathrooms are, and all the gestures of hospitality, and making people feel comfortable in a space that might otherwise be a little intimidating. Digital is no different as a resource. And both the sort of back end pieces that may not be as sexy, how to keep track of your donors, how to schedule spaces and do that efficiently so that you can optimize revenue and minimize costs, but then also the outward facing things, like the witness program of musical selections that the Gardner has, and how to make that intriguing and welcoming and easy to access for people. That's the challenge, but that's also the great opportunity with digital technology.
One of the things I noted in the description of this program is that you're looking for institutions that cultivate diverse audiences. I sense this has something to do with equity, but could it also be about survival in the long term?
I think the only way for cultural organizations to fulfill their mission, which after all is about welcoming people and making people interested and offering all kinds of great and intriguing works, is through diverse audiences. Understanding, how to, again, attract attention, how to address someone's curiosity, how to make people feel welcome. The great theater artist Anna Devere Smith has a phrase about radical welcome. And that's really the goal of our public institutions, and in particular our cultural institutions. So that's absolutely essential for survival, but also for delivering on the fundamental mission of culture.
Well, I know that many museums, they bring people in because they have a big name artist. They borrow some works from other places around the world, from other periods of time, but they also exist in this sort of cultural ecosystem. You've got a lot of emerging artists that need these platforms as well. What about the ability to work into that ecosystem?
I think that's really essential. And that's another one of the major contributions that digital technology can make. It used to be that institutions were the only way of introducing artists to audiences. Increasingly with digital, you don't need the bricks and mortar. Artists can, if they can find an audience, they can directly have that exchange. So the most excellent and savvy organizations are including that kind of opportunity as one of their offerings. We had the privilege of supporting 40 organizations in Boston, small and mid-sized organizations, as part of another grant program we run called Arts Innovation and Management. And it was fascinating to, as you say, see and get to learn more about the cultural ecology in Boston, and how many terrific organizations there are that are, they may be on the smaller side budget wise, but they have such a commitment to specific audiences and so many different ways of serving. And again, digital is one tool that organizations that are trying to attract and retain audiences just, have to be good at, and then have to figure out how to creatively mold to better project their individual offerings.
Now, I know this is work that can be done almost anywhere on the planet as far as the digital technology here, but at the same time, this could be a lot of jobs for people in the areas surrounding these museums. Isn't that another possible ripple effect?
I think that's absolutely true. Figuring out how to program, figuring out how to create the best kind of content, for a museum, that's everything from the photographer that captures the work digitally, to the musician who gets to, play the concert, to, the software expert that may have to do some customizing, to the copywriter who, writes up the bags that they help you buy in a gift shop. So, it is absolutely a vivid employment sector.